Martha Larson sat at the head of the oval oak table in her modest dining room, the single overhead lamp casting a gentle glow over her weathered hands folded in her lap. The late October chill pressed against the windows of her small Minnesota home. Beyond the panes, bare trees stood like spindly sentinels against the dusk sky. Across from her, Martha's son Tom passed the mashed potatoes to his wife, Nina. Martha's heart warmed at the familiar motions of family dinner, until Nina spoke, her voice edged with impatience. "She isn't helping at all," Nina said, spooning gravy over her potatoes. "But she sure knows how to devour a meal. Maybe she should be embarrassed." The words landed like a stone in Martha's chest. Silence filled the room like a heavy curtain. Tom's fork hovered halfway to his mouth, and he said nothing. Martha glanced at him. His jaw was set, his eyes darting to the tablecloth as though it bore the weight of his guilt. Nina's voice dropped to a murmur, but its sting lingered. "She just sits there, doesn't clear a dish or fix a sandwich for lunch. At least she could offer to help." Martha's fingers tightened around her napkin. She remembered the years she'd spent cooking Sunday dinners, tending her husband through long illness, patching clothes for her children. She'd done every small kindness with a quiet pride. But tonight, her service, once taken for granted, had turned into an unspoken indictment of worth. "Mother, would you pass the green beans?" Tom said at last, breaking the silence. His tone was gentle, but Martha sensed the conflict in his hesitation. She rose slowly and reached for the steaming dish, her joints aching from years of bending over flower beds and laundry tubs. She set the green beans before Nina with as much grace as she could muster. Nina offered a curt nod. Tom began to ladle beans onto his plate. Martha returned to her seat and prodded at her own dinner with her fork, tasting only the memory of salt. She felt as if that single phrase, "she's just poor," had opened a crack in her rib cage, letting the warm currents of memory and hurt seep through. The rest of the meal passed in uneasy quiet. Nina and Tom traded polite small talk about the weather and the upcoming bake sale, but Martha barely heard them. She watched their lips move, measuring the distance between the words and the unkind intention beneath. When the plates were cleared and Nina busied herself at the sink, Martha lifted her cup of lukewarm tea. The steam curled in the lamplight like a silent plea for comfort. She thought of the foreclosure notice she found folded in yesterday's mail, the worry lines etched deeper into her reflection every morning. No one had to say it aloud. She was poor. But in that moment, as the scent of soap and leftover dinner filled the air, Martha realized the ache of her dignity was far more painful than any financial worry. She set her teacup down with deliberate calm. The dinner had ended, but a longer, quieter reckoning had just begun. 8 that night, Martha lay alone in the spare bedroom, the narrow bed's mattress soft beneath her aged frame. The walls were painted a pale blue, now dim in the glow of a single nightlight. With the hush of the house around her, she stared up at a small water stain on the ceiling, an old leak never properly repaired. Her mind drifted back decades, to the quiet nights she'd spent bathing her husband John as cancer stole his strength. She remembered the careful way she supported his trembling body, washed each inch with gentle cloths, and whispered reassurances even as her heart broke. She'd held him when he couldn't stand and tucked him into that very bed when he could no longer speak. Then her thoughts turned to her son, Tom's school years, scraping together pennies so his tuition stayed paid. She'd mailed checks in envelopes addressed "From Grandma," so he never felt the shame of asking his parents for help. She'd worked overtime at the diner, blanketed her worries in a tight-lipped smile, and counted his allowance among groceries and electricity bills. Lying under the pale ceiling, Martha realized how many sacrifices she'd made in silence. She had always done for others what they could not, or would not, do for her. And yet tonight, she sat quietly judged by the very people she had nurtured. The moonlight shifted as clouds passed, and Martha's eyes finally closed. By dawn, she rose on her own, careful not to stir the rest of the household. In the kitchen, she lit the kettle and filled it with water. While it boiled, she reached into the bottom shelf of her closet and retrieved a small stack of neatly folded outfits: sturdy jeans, a warm sweater, a single change of underwear. The kettle hissed. She placed a tea bag in her favorite chipped mug and poured the steaming water over it. She let it steep, inhaling the faint scent of chamomile and mint as she sipped. The warmth slid down her throat, bringing clarity rather than comfort. Martha returned to the guest room with the tea in hand. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her worn leather suitcase. With practiced precision, she folded each garment, light jacket, socks, toiletries, and stacked them inside. Not a sound escaped her lips or disturbed the sleeping house beyond. When the suitcase lay packed, she knelt to slide a pair of worn loafers inside a plastic bag and gently zipped them into place. In one last quiet motion, she retrieved a small envelope from the nightstand drawer, cash saved over months, and a farewell note addressed simply, "For Tom, with love." She placed the envelope in the suitcase's inner pocket, then rose and padded back to the kitchen. The tea had cooled. She finished the last sip and set the mug in the sink. Standing tall in the pale morning light, Martha straightened her sweater and rested a hand on the cool brass handle of the front door. No tears, no farewells, only the unwavering resolve of a woman who had given everything for others, and now, at last, was giving something to herself. She stepped outside, closing the door softly behind her. In the silent hush of pre-dawn, Martha Larson walked away from the life she'd known, toward the freedom she'd chosen, quietly, without a word, leaving everyone to wonder why. The morning air was crisp as Martha paused on the front stoop, breath visible in soft puffs. Inside, the house remained silent, each room holding the ghost of her life with John and Tom. She placed her hand on the brass doorknob and took a final, steadying breath before stepping back inside. In the kitchen, the oak table stood empty except for 3 carefully arranged items: a small leather satchel, an old fabric-bound notebook, and a framed photograph of her late husband. Beside these lay the tarnished key to her front door. The arrangement was deliberate, a silent tableau meant to speak louder than words. Martha knelt and lifted the photograph, brushing a fingertip across John's smiling face. They'd danced in that very kitchen to a scratchy 45 RPM record years ago, spinning about with laughter in mismatched steps. She pressed the photo to her heart, her own smile fragile but genuine. Next, she reached for the notebook, its cover worn and pages yellowed. Inside were decades of journal entries: the day she and John moved in, her first stirrings of love, Tom's baby hospital tears, her husband's last lucid prayers for her future. She thumbed to the final page, where she'd sketched a simple map: the town center, the post office, and a circled spot marked New Life. Her satchel held only essentials: a change of clothes, a small toiletry kit, and that envelope of savings meant for emergencies. She zipped it closed and slung it over her shoulder, feeling its light weight steady her. Finally, she lifted the tarnished key and placed it squarely in the center of the table. Its metal gleamed faintly under the morning light. Martha straightened and stood back, arms folded over her chest. Her eyes traveled from the key to the notebook, then to John's photo, the sum of her life's history, left behind in a solemn farewell. She paused for one last look at the empty table, then turned toward the door. Each step felt timeless, the silence of the house echoing her decision. At the threshold, her hand hovered an instant before she placed her palm on the doorframe. Without a backward glance, Martha stepped outside. The key remained on the table, a quiet testament to her departure. As she closed the door behind her, the house settled into stillness, guarding its secrets within empty rooms. Out on the path, Martha Larson walked forward. No announcement, no goodbyes, guided only by the promise she'd scrawled in her notebook and the memory of John's unwavering love lighting her way. Martha arrived at Greenwood Haven just before noon, her small leather satchel resting on her shoulder. The building sat on the edge of Maplewood, just a mile from town center. A tidy brick structure surrounded by well-trimmed evergreens and a gravel courtyard. She paused at the main entrance, inhaling the cool air, and let the automatic glass doors slide open. Inside, the reception area was bright and calm, with worn hardwood floors and framed watercolor landscapes lining the walls. A friendly aide named Marisol greeted her, clipboard in hand. "Welcome, Mrs. Larson. We've prepared a lovely room for you. Let me show you." They walked down a carpeted corridor to room 214. Marisol turned the brass knob and swung the door open. Martha stepped inside. Her new home was modest. A single bed with a floral print quilt neatly folded at the foot, a sturdy wooden nightstand, and a high-backed chair upholstered in sage green vinyl. Opposite the bed, a small desk held a bedside lamp and a telephone, and above it hung a bulletin board marked with Martha's name in elegant script. But the focal point was the window, a tall, narrow pane set into a sunny wall. Through it, she could see the courtyard's winding path, a single bench beneath an oak tree, and the distant steeple of St. Michael's Church. Sunlight flooded the room each afternoon, painting golden rectangles on the floral carpet. "This room overlooks the courtyard," Marisol explained. "You requested plenty of light and a quiet view." Martha smiled. "Yes, thank you. I wanted a place where I can watch the seasons change." Marisol handed her a small key. "Here's the bedside drawer key. If you need anything, help with meals, housekeeping, or just someone to talk to, you can call me any time." Once Marisol left, Martha set her satchel on the chair and moved to the window. She lifted the sash slightly, letting in a breeze scented with pine and autumn leaves. It felt good to choose her own space, to control this new chapter rather than have it imposed upon her. She unpacked slowly, sliding the framed photo of John onto the nightstand, placing her notebook beside it, and draping her favorite shawl across the chair's back. Each item found its rightful place in this small sanctuary. Late that afternoon, Martha sat in the chair with her journal open on her lap. She wrote of the cool breeze, the golden light, and the comforting quiet. She watched as an elderly man with a white walker followed the courtyard path, pausing to sit on the bench and close his eyes against the sun. Here, the bed, the chair, the single window, every element was hers by choice. No unspoken demands, no harsh words accusing her of uselessness. Instead, a peaceful room, exactly the way she wanted it. As twilight deepened, Martha closed her journal and turned off the lamp. The window framed a cobalt sky, and the oak's silhouette stood watch over Greenwood Haven. For the first time in years, she felt truly at home. The late morning sun warmed Martha's small room, when a gentle knock sounded at the door. She had just finished her tea and settled into the high-backed chair by the window. "Come in," she called, her voice steady. The door opened to reveal Claire Whitman, Martha's best friend from high school. Silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, bright eyes behind tortoiseshell frames. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 20 years, not since Claire moved south after graduation. "Martha?" Claire asked, stepping inside and closing the door softly. "Are you really living here?" Martha rose and opened her arms. "Claire! I can't believe it's you!" They embraced, the years slipping away in an instant. Claire's gaze roamed the room. The oak nightstand with John's photo, the quilted bedspread, the window framing the courtyard. "This place is wonderful," she said, settling into the chair opposite Martha's. "You look at peace." Martha poured them both a fresh pot of chamomile tea and passed Claire a cup. They sipped in companionable silence for a moment before Claire spoke. "I heard what happened," Claire said gently, her voice low. "Your son and his wife. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Martha's eyes flicked to the window. "Thank you, but I'm okay now. I chose this. For the first time, it feels like I'm in control." Claire nodded. Her brow creased with empathy. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. You've always been one of the strongest people I know, but you've spent so much of your life putting everyone else first." Martha smiled wryly. "I suppose I have." Claire leaned forward. "Martha, it's never too late to rewrite your story. You've started fresh here, but there's so much more waiting for you." Martha set her cup down and met Claire's gaze. "What do you mean?" Claire's smile brightened. "You could volunteer, teach art classes at the community center, write that memoir you once mentioned. Remember? About growing up on Oak Street in the 60s? Martha's heart stirred at the memory. She had kept a half-finished journal of her childhood days, the Sunday bike rides, the sock hops at the community hall, the first time she held John's hand under the bleachers. "I haven't touched that notebook in years," Martha admitted. Claire pressed her hand over Martha's. "Take it out. You have a lifetime of stories. People need to hear them. You're here, safe, free to choose your next chapter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Martha felt a warm hope bloom in her chest. Outside, a breeze stirred the oak leaves, and sunshine danced on the windowsill. "You're right," Martha said, lifting her chin. "Maybe it's time." Claire raised her teacup in a toast. "To new beginnings, at any age." Martha echoed the toast, her smile broad and genuine. For the first time in years, she believed there was still plenty to change, plenty left to live, and a dear friend by her side to encourage every step. A week after Claire's visit, Martha invited her friend back to Greenwood Haven for an afternoon of organizing old papers. They spread filing boxes across the small desk, faded photographs, tax receipts, mortgage statements, and, buried beneath them, an embossed envelope marked Larson Family Land Records. Claire lifted the envelope, her brow knitting in curiosity. "I don't remember seeing this before," she said, sliding the flap open. Inside lay a property deed dated June 1972, in crisp type, and signed by a county clerk. The document identified Martha Ann Larson, her maiden name, as the sole owner of a parcel on Pine Hill Road, a 10-acre wooded lot with views of Lake Arbor. Martha leaned over, squinting at the fine print. "That was the land John and I bought when Tom was born. We planned to build a summer cabin there." Her voice softened with memory. "But then John fell ill, and we never followed through." Claire's eyes widened. She flipped through adjacent papers, property tax bills from 1973 through last year, all addressed to Martha, Estate of M.A. Larson. None of it had ever been transferred. Tom thought he inherited the house, Martha whispered, recalling her son's offhand comments last Thanksgiving. He told me he took over everything after I retired. Claire's lips curved with concern. But the deed clearly never changed hands. You're still the legal owner. Martha closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of that realization settling in. All these years, I thought it was gone, lost in some closing document or swallowed by probate. I never checked. Claire snapped her fingers. That's incredible and potentially invaluable. Pine Hill Road property is worth a small fortune now, and since it's still in your name, you have full rights to it. Martha reached for the deed, fingertips trembling. She thought of the foreclosure notice she ignored, the shame she carried. She thought of Tom and Nina, of the dinner table's harsh words. Now she saw a new possibility, a resource of her own. Claire pulled out her notebook. We'll need certified copies of that deed, an affidavit of non-transfer, and a current property appraisal. Then we can decide what you want to do: sell, lease, or keep it for a family retreat. Martha nodded, heart thudding. I need time to think. As Claire began cataloging other land-related documents, old survey sketches, boundary markers, contract drafts, Martha felt a surge of empowerment. She had unwittingly carried a hidden asset all this time, as real and living as the autumn breeze rustling the pines. When the sun dipped toward the horizon, Claire closed the last box. I'll contact the county recorder's office, she said. We'll get this all sorted. Martha stood by the window, watching the orange glow fade. In her hand, the original deed felt like a lifeline, proof that her life's work, her sacrifices, and her very identity still held value. Tonight, she thought, she would sleep soundly. For the first time in decades, she wasn't just Martha Larson, the quiet mother and widow. She was Martha Larson, landowner, guardian of a forgotten legacy she was determined to reclaim. A few days later, while sorting through a dusty cedar chest in her bedroom, Martha's fingers closed around a heavy, unopened envelope. The blue-gray paper was faded, the edges frayed. She turned it over and saw John's familiar handwriting. Martha A. Larson. No date, no return address. Her pulse quickened as she slid a letter opener beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of creamy stationery. The ink, though faint, was unmistakably John's. My dearest Martha, if you are reading this, I am gone. I know you worry about losing our home, but I want you to understand one thing above all. This house is yours, always. Our son may have grown, and life may change, but no one can ever force you out. Love forever. John. Martha's breath caught. She pressed the letter to her chest, the faint scent of his tobacco pipe still lingering in the fibers. She remembered the day he'd given her this letter, saying only, "Promise me you'll never doubt your place here." She had tucked it away, afraid that reading it would make the reality of his illness too permanent. Now, years later, the message was balm to her soul. She sat on the edge of her bed, letter in hand, tears tracing quiet paths down her cheeks. John's words felt like a shield, stronger than any legal deed, a promise of lifelong belonging. She placed the letter on her nightstand next to John's framed photograph. Outside her window, a soft breeze stirred fallen oak leaves across the lawn. Martha rose and walked to the mirror, brushing her hair back. In her reflection, she saw not a helpless widow or a discarded mother, but the woman John trusted above all. Clutching the letter, she wrote a brief note to Claire. I just found something. Meet me tonight and bring your questions. As dusk settled over Greenwood Haven, Martha knew John's words would guide her next steps. His promise echoed louder than any courtroom or property deed. Her home and her dignity were irrevocably hers. The next morning, Martha walked into Oak and Pine Realty just after it opened. The crisp autumn light filtered through the glass storefront, illuminating polished oak desks and framed sold signs on the walls. She hesitated at the reception desk. A young woman with neat braids looked up. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Martha offered a small smile. "I have an appointment with Jeremiah Coulson." "Of course," the receptionist said, tapping her keyboard. "Mr. Coulson will see you now." She stood and led Martha through a sliding door into a cozy office lined with model homes and brochures of Lake Arbor properties. Jeremiah Coulson looked up from his desk, surprise flashing in his gray eyes. He stood quickly. "Martha, I wasn't expecting you today." Martha took a seat opposite him, pulling her satchel to her lap. Jeremiah ran a hand through his sandy hair, clearing the surprise from his expression. "I thought you were just retiring quietly." She laid the original Pine Hill Road deed on his desk, edges crisp against the wood. "I'm here about selling my land." His eyebrows rose. "I see." He scanned the deed, then met her gaze. "I thought Tom took over everything after you." "Well, after you moved." Martha nodded. "He thought so too, but I found the deed still lists me as the owner. That parcel belongs to me." She folded her hands. "I'm not carrying anyone else anymore." Jeremiah tapped his pen on the desk, considering. "You want to sell it?" She straightened. "Yes. I've carried burdens for decades. John's care, Tom's tuition, the weight of family expectations. Now it's my turn. I'm selling my share to fund the next chapter of my life." Jeremiah's face softened. "Understood. You deserve this. Pine Hill Road land has appreciated significantly, worth nearly $500,000 now. We'll need an appraisal and a market analysis, but we can move quickly." Martha leaned back, relief warming her chest. "I'd like it listed at market value. No discounts, no favors." He smiled, admiration in his eyes. "Of course. You earned every cent." She crossed her legs and stood. "I want to thank you for handling this discreetly. I'd prefer no publicity." "Absolutely," Jeremiah said, rising. "I'll set everything in motion, and we'll keep it between us until you're ready." Martha reached out, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you. This means more than you know." As she left the office, autumn leaves rustled along the sidewalk, heralding change in the crisp air. Martha's heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had reclaimed her legacy on her own terms, and now she would chart her own course forward. Within days of her meeting at Oak and Pine Realty, Martha received the first draft of the listing agreement in her secure email. There it was in black and white: the parcel identification number, the legal description of the 10 wooded acres on Pine Hill Road, and the listing price, $475,000. She printed out the agreement at Greenwood Havens Business Center, the printer's hum echoing in the quiet hallway. In her private room, she laid the papers on the small desk beneath the window. The listings agent's name, phone number, and commission rate stared up at her. She scanned every line carefully, initialed each page in the margin, and signed the final signature line. There was no mention of Tom or Nina, no forwarded copy to her son's email, no call, no explanation, just the methodical steps of a homeowner reclaiming control. That afternoon, as the gravel courtyard swirled with fallen maple leaves, Martha returned to her room with a single goal: leave no loose ends. She opened the guest address book on her desk, selected Tom Larson's number, and did not dial. Instead, she closed the book and locked it away. Meanwhile, Word of the new listing quietly circulated among the realty office's network. Prospective buyers were already scheduling viewings. Soon, people would walk her land, admire the pines and the distant lake vistas, unaware of the woman who once felt powerless. Inside her room, Martha removed the small framed photograph of John from the nightstand. Behind it lay a crisp white index card. In simple block letters, she had written, "I am not poor. I was only silent." She slipped the note under the photograph's frame so that when the new occupant unpacked their things, they might discover both a keepsake and a message. The photograph and note would convey her truth long after she had moved on. Her suitcase, already returned to its closet, remained closed. There was no fanfare, no final embrace, no phone call of farewell. Later that evening, Greenwood Haven's front desk would receive the signed agreement and notify all appropriate parties. The sale would proceed, legally sound and entirely Martha's choice. As twilight fell over the evergreens, Martha stood by her window one last time, watching the oak bench in the courtyard. Tomorrow, she would sit there with her journal, planning the next phase of her life. She took a quiet, satisfied breath. The paperwork was complete, her independence restored. No goodbyes were necessary, just the steady, deliberate reclaiming of self. And somewhere, if Tom ever looked closely at that photograph, he would understand the truth she'd left behind. She was never poor, only silent until she chose to speak. On Monday morning, Tom Larson returned from his early shift at the mill to find the house unusually quiet. The front door stood slightly ajar, and the kitchen table was bare. No coffee mug, no mail, just the single envelope sealed in crisp white. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a clear, even font. To whom it may concern. Please be advised that the property located at 14 Maplewood Lane, Hanover, New Hampshire, has been sold. The new owners will take possession on Monday of next week. All necessary paperwork has been filed with the county registry. Respectfully, Martha A. Larson. Tom's heart pounded. He dropped the letter on the table and spun around, calling for his mother. "Mom, are you here?" Silence answered. The rooms were empty, the house echoing with absence. Tom raced upstairs. Her bedroom was vacant, the bed neatly made, her side of the dresser bare. He ran through each room, empty. Then the phone rang in the entryway. The caller ID displayed Martha's number. Tom's chest twisted. He reached for the receiver. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" The line clicked, shifting to voicemail. He listened to the beep, then his own trembling voice. "Mom, please call me back." He dropped the phone onto the couch and sank down, head in hands. The letter trembled at his side. Martha had sold the house out from under him, given him no warning, no chance to say anything. Downstairs, a soft breeze rattled the window sash, carrying the distant sound of a school bus rounding the corner. Tom closed his eyes, recalling every memory of family dinners, laughter in the living room, and his mother's gentle hand on his shoulder. He thought of the note she'd left hidden by John's photograph. "I am not poor. I was only silent." He felt both sorrow and a grudging respect. She had made her choice and left him to reckon with it. Tom stood and pocketed the letter. He wiped his eyes and headed for the front door, ready to face the real estate agent or the new owners. Whatever came next, the message was clear. Martha Larson had found her freedom, and Tom would have to find his own way forward. By Tuesday afternoon, rumors of Martha's dramatic departure had spread like wildfire through Maplewood's small shopping district. At Harper's Market, Nina Larson stood in the produce aisle, her face flushed and her grocery basket forgotten. She grabbed her longtime friend, Gloria Chen, by the arm. "I can't believe it!" Nina hissed, gesturing wildly at the oranges on display. "That old lady, my mother-in-law, she sold everything. The house, the land on Pine Hill Road. She left us out in the cold." Gloria's eyes widened. She'd just pulled a carton of eggs from the cooler. "Really?" Nina waved her phone like a rallying flag. "The letter's right here. She listed the property, just like that. No notice, no phone calls. Tom came home, and poof! She was gone." A small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Patel, the florist next door, hovered with a bouquet of chrysanthemums in her arms. Mr. Donnelly, the hardware store owner, leaned against a produce display, arms crossed. "Sold it," Mrs. Patel repeated softly, her brow furrowing. "But that was her only home." Nina's voice rose to a shriek. "Exactly! She said she wasn't poor, just silent. How dare she turn her back on her own son?" A hush fell over the aisle. Shoppers paused mid-cart shuffle. The butcher's boy stopped stacking packaged roasts. Even the cashier at the checkout glanced over, scanning the crowd with curious eyes. Gloria cleared her throat, offering Nina a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. "Maybe there's more to the story." Nina scoffed. "There's no story that justifies this." She stormed off toward the dairy aisle, leaving a wake of ripe apples rolling in her wake. But as she passed, the market's patrons exchanged cautious glances. The initial shock gave way to whispered questions. Is it true she owned land here? "I heard about the deed. Something about an old friend helping her." "Maybe she's protecting herself from some risk." Over the next hour, the aisle's tension softened into curiosity. People spoke in hushed tones about Martha, the quiet widow who once baked pies for the town bake sale, who knitted scarves for new mothers, who volunteered at the community garden. By closing time, the butcher's boy had cornered Gloria near the exit. "Can you believe Mrs. Larson did all that alone?" he asked. "I thought she was frail." Gloria shook her head. She had her reasons, and a lot of courage. Across town, at the coffee shop, Mrs. Patel and Mr. Donnelly compared notes about a recent legal seminar that mentioned elder rights. They discussed the possibility that Martha exercised her own rights to sell the property on her terms. That evening, Nina returned home to find a steady stream of concerned neighbors on her porch, offering support, not for her plight, but for Martha's bold stand. The community that once overlooked the old lady was now leaning in, eager to hear the real story behind the sale. And so, the shriek in the market, Nina's anguished outburst, became the spark that ignited Maplewood's curiosity and sympathy. For the first time, people listened not to rumors, but to the truth of Martha Larson's decisive journey to reclaim her life. With the sale proceeds safely secured, Martha set her next plan into motion, establishing a sanctuary for women like herself, who had long sacrificed their own futures. She leased a Victorian-style home on Elm Street, its brick facade framed by climbing ivy, and named it Haven House. On opening day, crisp autumn leaves swirled across the sidewalk as Martha and a small group of volunteers gathered. Beneath a wooden porch swing draped in fairy lights, a simple banner proclaimed, "Welcome to Haven House." Among the guests were Mary, a retired school librarian who once hid her pension statements; Agnes, a former nurse who'd quietly cared for her ailing husband; and Rose, a widowed seamstress whose hands could no longer thread a needle. Each had known the sting of being just poor in their family's eyes, and each arrived hoping for companionship and support. Martha, wearing a tailored navy coat and clutching ceremonial scissors, stepped forward to address the group. Her voice carried steady warmth. Haven House exists because too many women have sat in silence, believing they had nowhere else. Here, you have a voice, a circle of allies, and a place to rest. She cut the ribbon, and as it fell away, Mary unveiled a stack of soft blankets. Agnes placed baskets of homemade muffins on a sideboard. Rose displayed hand-stitched pillows embroidered with the words strength and hope. Inside, the rooms were arranged for comfort and conversation. A sunlit parlor held mismatched armchairs around a low coffee table strewn with puzzles and magazines. The dining room's long oak table already bore a pot of stew and jars of freshly baked bread, remnants of a communal lunch prepared by volunteers. In the library alcove, a bookshelf dedicated to personal memoirs and how-to guides on elder law gleamed. Martha had sourced donated copies of legal self-help books, ensuring each resident could understand her rights. That afternoon, as the women settled in, Martha poured tea from a porcelain teapot she'd brought from her own collection. She invited them to share their stories, knowing that community often began with being heard. One by one, they spoke of sacrifices made, of homes lost, of years spent caring for others. Martha listened, offering nods of empathy and practical advice gleaned from her own journey. The group's sorrow transformed into solidarity. Laughter fluttered through the parlor when Mary reminisced about the time she ruined a school bake sale by mixing salt into her cupcakes. As dusk approached, the golden lamplight filled Haven House with a cozy glow. Martha looked around at the circle she had created, a haven of resilience and compassion. She felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing her own silence had led to this new chapter of empowerment. Later, alone in her office at the back of the house, Martha placed a framed print above her desk, John's reassuring words among his favorite wildflowers. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "Haven House, where silence becomes strength." Martha Larson sat back in her chair, sipping her tea. The world outside might still judge her for selling her past, but inside these walls, every woman knew she was worthy of dignity and of a new beginning. Within a week, Haven House welcomed its first 3 residents. Each woman arrived with a suitcase, a story, and one word in common: burden. Evelyn, age 72, shuffled in first. A retired school librarian, she carried the weight of unredeemed vacation days and unpaid overtime, years of dedication overlooked by budget cuts. Her stooped shoulders and cautious smile spoke of a life spent lifting others' minds, while her own needs sat unmet. Next came Florence, age 68, a former nurse whose gentle hands had soothed feverish children and comforted grieving families. Even after her retirement, she couldn't refuse calls for help. Her burden was exhaustion, an ache in her bones from decades of long shifts and emotional labor, compounded by the guilt of leaving her son's family to raise themselves. Finally, Madeleine, age 65, stepped through the door. A seamstress by trade, she'd spent years mending both clothes and marriages, patching holes large and small. But under her steady needle lay the secret of her own frayed life. She'd hidden her daughter's college debts for years, forging another burden she could no longer carry in silence. They found themselves drawn together in the parlor, each settling into the mismatched armchairs around the coffee table. The soft hum of the old record player filled the air with the distant strains of Moon River, a gentle reminder that new paths could still unfold. Evelyn produced a small stack of photographs, students' smiling faces from her teaching days, and placed them on the table. "I was so proud of those children," she said softly, "but I missed my own granddaughter's school plays." Florence unfolded her hands in her lap. "I've spent a lifetime caring for strangers," she admitted, "but I've neglected my own health and my son's wedding." Madeline's eyes glistened as she fingered a piece of lace from a bridal gown she'd sewn decades ago. "I tacked bills under my desk to keep my daughter's future intact," she whispered. "But I've worn myself thin." Martha joined them with a tray of tea and offered warm smiles all around. "Here," she said, "we share our burdens so we don't have to carry them alone." She poured tea into delicate floral cups, each woman's favorite blend: chamomile for Evelyn, peppermint for Florence, and Earl Grey for Madeleine. As they sipped, the three women unfolded their stories, tears mingling with laughter in equal measure. The parlor grew intimate. Questions replaced self-judgment, and compassion wove a fragile web of trust. By evening's end, the burdens they arrived with felt lighter. Evelyn vowed to schedule her own doctor's appointment. Florence promised to carve out Sundays for rest. Madeline resolved to discuss her finances openly with her daughter. Outside, the golden sunset bathed Haven House in its final glow. Inside, the hearth's gentle flicker mirrored the warmth kindled among three newfound friends. In this cottage sanctuary, the word burden had transformed into release, each woman discovering that sometimes the greatest gift lies in simply sharing the weight. And so the first chapter of Haven House's story closed, with three women who bore different burdens, yet together discovered how to set them down. Late one afternoon, the front door to Haven House swung open as a tall, earnest young man stepped in. Liam Carson, Martha's 17-year-old grandson, had arrived, his face a mixture of relief and reproach. "Mama," he called softly, looking around the cozy parlor. The mismatched armchairs, the low coffee table strewn with magazines, the late afternoon sun pooling across the rug. It all seemed familiar, yet somehow new. Martha, seated in her favorite chair by the window, rose slowly. She offered him a gentle smile. "Hello, Liam." His gaze darted to the empty chair next to her. "I've been calling your phone nonstop," he said, voice thick. "Why didn't you tell me where you were?" Martha patted the empty seat. "There's your spot, just like always." She cleared her throat. "I didn't go far, kiddo. I just went home." Liam's brow furrowed. "Home? This is new. This place. You sold Grandma's house, Mama." She nodded, folding her hands. "I did, but house and home aren't always the same. I needed a place where I belonged again." He sank into the empty chair, its cushion dipping under his weight. "But you left without saying goodbye. I came here every day after school, and the door was locked." Martha's blue eyes softened. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see me struggle." Liam ran a hand through his dark hair. "I worry about you. Grandma, you're all I've got." She reached out and laid a weathered hand on his. "And you're all I've got, too." He studied her face, the fine lines around her eyes, the strength in her posture, and the hurt in his softened. "Why here?" he asked. Martha smiled wistfully. "Because I needed to be among friends who understand what it's like to carry heavy burdens, and because I wanted you to see me choose myself for once." Liam shook his head slowly. "You always took care of everyone else." "Always," she agreed. "But now it's your turn to help me." He leaned forward. "I can help. I can mow the lawn, stack firewood, whatever you need." She chuckled, the sound warm in the quiet room. "That would mean the world." Liam glanced at the empty chair again. "It's not empty." She reached out and squeezed his hand. No, it's saved for you. You're welcome here, always. Outside, the courtyard's oak branches swayed in the breeze. Inside, grandson and grandmother sat together in the late daylight. The empty chair stood between them, no longer a symbol of absence, but a promise of belonging, a reminder that home is where love makes a seat for you at the table. Early one crisp morning, before the sun fully warmed the courtyard, Tom Larson stood at the wrought iron gate of Haven House. He looked older than the last time Martha had seen him, his shoulders a little straighter, his eyes a little more wary. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the gate open and stepped onto the gravel path. Inside, Martha was tending the raised flower beds by the window, pulling late-blooming asters from the soil. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. She straightened when she heard the gate's soft click. "Tom," she said, setting aside her trowel. Tom swallowed, glancing at the neat rows of pansies and the empty chair beneath the oak tree. "Martha," he replied, voice hushed. He shifted on his feet, as if unsure how to proceed. Martha turned and nodded toward the back door. "Come in." He followed her into the kitchen, where the kettle sat warming on the stove. Without a word, Martha reached for two ceramic mugs, one plain white, the other adorned with a simple pine cone motif. Tom watched her fill the mugs with boiling water and steep two tea bags, green tea for him, herbal mint for her. She set a mug in front of him and pushed it across the worn pine countertop. Tom's hand trembled slightly as he wrapped his fingers around the warm cup. Martha sipped her own tea, watching him carefully. "I'm sorry," Tom said after a moment, eyes fixed on his mug. "I should have paid attention to you sooner. I never meant to shut you out." Martha did not respond immediately. She drained her cup and set it down with deliberate calm. Then she stood and gestured toward the back door. Tom followed her out into the garden. They settled onto a weathered bench beneath the oak tree where Meredith once sat. The early light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Tom exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "Martha, I know I failed you," he began. "I thought I was protecting you, managing your affairs so you wouldn't have to worry. But I see now I robbed you of your voice and your home. I'm sorry." Martha folded her hands in her lap and gazed at the flower beds. After a long pause, she spoke in a voice that was gentle but firm. "Tom, I didn't need your protection as much as I needed to be trusted. I needed to know you believed I could make my own choices." Tom's eyes glistened. "I do believe that now." Martha nodded once. "Good, that's all I ever wanted." They sat side by side in silence, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and a distant robin's call. The bench felt solid beneath them, a quiet symbol of the understanding they were rebuilding. After several minutes, Tom stood and brushed soil from his jeans. "If there's anything I can do to help," Martha placed a hand on his arm. "Just be here, honestly. Share the work, share the story." Tom offered a small smile. "I can do that." As they walked back toward the house, no more words needed, they passed the empty chair under the oak and paused. Tom placed his hand on its back, a quiet promise of presence rather than possession. Inside, Martha returned to the countertop and rinsed her teacup. The early rays of sunlight followed her back into the kitchen, a gentle reminder that forgiveness, like new growth in a garden, takes time but can flourish when tended with care. That afternoon, Martha sat at the small oak desk in her study, sunlight streaming in through the single window. Before her lay a fresh stack of legal stationery and an open laptop showing her attorney's video call waiting room. On the wall behind her, The words John's promise were framed in her husband's handwriting. No one can ever force you out. With a steady breath, she clicked into the call. Moments later, her elder law attorney, Miss Reynolds, appeared on screen, clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, Martha. Are you ready to finalize your living will?" Martha nodded. "Yes, please. I want to ensure Haven House remains a sanctuary for as long as it exists." Ms. Reynolds shared her screen, displaying a draft document titled Last Will and Testament of Martha A. Larson. The first article revoked all prior wills. The second named Meredith Reed as executor, with Helen Barrett as successor. Martha scrolled to the heart of the document. Article 3. Bequests I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my estate, real property, personal property, and all financial assets, to Haven House, a nonprofit organization established on Elm Street, Hanover, New Hampshire. It is my express wish that Haven House continue to operate as a residential sanctuary for elderly women in need, providing shelter, community, and support. She paused, then added a crucial clause. Article 4. Perpetuity Clause. In the event that Haven House ceases operations or dissolves as a nonprofit, all assets shall transfer to a duly incorporated successor organization dedicated to the same purpose. Under no circumstances shall any beneficiary, by blood or marriage, have the authority to sell, transfer, or repurpose these assets for personal gain. Martha's hand hovered over the digital signature line. She wanted no loopholes. Ms. Reynolds spoke softly. "We have one more provision to ensure the residents' security." She clicked to another section. Article 5. Resident protection. Any person residing at Haven House under the age of 85 at the time of my passing shall have the right to remain in residence for the duration of her life. No unforeseen event, financial downturn, or change in board composition shall be grounds for eviction. Martha nodded, satisfaction settling in her bones. That's exactly right. She signed electronically, then watched as Ms. Reynolds applied the digital notary seal. The document was time-stamped and irrevocably recorded. When the call ended, Martha leaned back, feeling the final weight of her legacy take shape. Haven House, and every woman within its walls, was now protected by her unwavering resolve, bound by law and love. As she rose to place the living will in her safe, she whispered to the empty room, "No more silence. Only sanctuary." On a crisp Saturday morning, the townspeople of Maplewood gathered in the courtyard of Haven House for its official opening ceremony. White folding chairs lined the gravel path beneath the old oak tree. Pale blue and lavender ribbons fluttered from the porch railing. A simple wooden podium stood at the foot of the front steps, flanked by potted chrysanthemums in autumn hues. Among the guests were neighbors who had whispered Martha's name in awe. Mrs. Patel, the florist who'd arranged flowers for their wedding. Mr. Donnelly, the hardware store owner who'd once loaned Martha a hammer. Claire Whitman, Martha's lifelong friend. And the first three residents, Evelyn, Florence, and Madeline, smiling with anticipation. At precisely 10 o'clock, Martha stepped onto the porch, dressed in a soft gray coat and pearls that had once belonged to John. She paused, hand on the podium, and looked over the assembled faces, some familiar, some new, all here to witness a promise kept. The hush was so complete that the brush of the oak leaves sounded like applause. Martha cleared her throat and began, "Good morning. Thank you all for joining me today. When I first set foot on this property, it was with a heavy heart, burdened by years of giving everything away, of choosing silence over my own voice. But I believed that every woman deserves a place to call her own, a refuge where her worth is never measured by her past sacrifices. She turned slightly to the house behind her, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Haven House is more than a building. It is a door open to those who have been overlooked, forgotten, or shamed for their vulnerability. Here, you are not defined by what you have lost, but by the strength you carry. Martha's gaze settled on Evelyn, Florence, and Madeleine, standing proudly near the porch steps in their best coats. To the women who will live here, this home is your sanctuary. No burden is too heavy to share, no story too small to be heard. You will find companionship, support, and respect under this roof. Murmurs of affirmation rippled among the guests. Claire dabbed at her eyes with a lavender handkerchief. And to this town, Martha continued, may Haven House stand as a reminder that we all have the power to give comfort, to lift each other up, and to turn compassion into action. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. The crowd leaned forward as she cut the ribbon, a soft snip that echoed louder than any brass fanfare. Applause broke like a wave through the courtyard, rising in genuine warmth. Local news reporters snapped photos as Martha stepped aside, inviting the residents and guests to tour the interior. Laughter and quiet conversation poured from the parlor as visitors admired the cozy armchairs and community library. The scent of pumpkin soup from the dining room wafted out to greet the crisp air. Martha lingered at the door, watching townspeople mingle with the new residents. She felt John's presence in the steady breeze and heard his promise in every word of gratitude and every helping hand offered. Later, at a small reception under the oak, Claire raised her glass of cider. To Martha Larson, she toasted, the woman who found her voice and gave dozens more a place to be heard. Evelyn, Florence, and Madeleine joined the toast, their smiles bright as they clinked their mugs. Martha lifted her own glass, voice carrying across the courtyard. Here's to every woman who has ever felt alone. For you, there is now a door and a home, a haven at last. The applause rose again, and Martha allowed herself a hopeful smile. In this moment, surrounded by friends old and new, she knew that her years of silence had led to something far more powerful: the creation of a refuge where no woman would ever have to face life's burdens alone. Later that evening, after Haven House's celebration had wound down and the last guests had departed, Martha returned to her study. The room was warm under the glow of her green-shaded banker's lamp. On the desk lay her leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed, its spine softly creased from decades of use. She slid into her chair and placed a steaming cup of chamomile tea to one side. The house was quiet. Only the faint tick of the mantel clock punctuated the stillness. With a deep breath, Martha opened the ledger to the first entry, dated January 1985. Line after line detailed loans and cash gifts she had made to Tom over the years. Tuition checks mailed in unmarked envelopes, rent payments sent from Grandma, surprise deposits to cover car repairs, contributions toward his wedding, emergency cash when his furnace broke in winter. Each entry was concise. March 15th, 1986, $1,200. College tuition, August 2nd, 1989, $750. Car brake repairs, November 20th, 1995, $2,500. Rent, Maplewood Apartments, June 14th, 1999, $3,000. Wedding gift to Tom and Nina. She turned page after page, tracking deposits for health insurance premiums, unexpected hospital bills, home maintenance, and even tuition assistance for Tom's children. Many entries were marked with a small asterisk, a gentle reminder to herself that she'd quietly honored every need without asking for anything in return. Midway through the ledger, she paused at an entry from March 2008. March 3rd, 2008. $5,000. Emergency loan. Payable when possible. Martha traced the ink with her fingertip. Tom had never repaid that loan. Neither had he questioned it. She felt a twinge of both pride and sadness. Pride that she'd always been there for her son. Sadness that he'd never recognized the full scope of her generosity. She flipped to the final pages, where recent entries recorded smaller sums. Groceries, utility bills, contributions to his children's education funds. At last, she reached the final tally line. Total advances and gifts. To Thomas Larson, $128,000. Martha's breath caught at the number, a sum she'd quietly given, $1 at a time, over more than 3 decades. She closed the ledger gently, as though laying to rest a chapter of her life she no longer needed to carry. For a long moment, she sat in silence, teacup untouched. The clock ticked steadily, marking time until dawn. Then she rose, slid the ledger back into her locked desk drawer, and turned off the lamp. As she extinguished the light and the room receded into shadow, Martha thought of John's letter, of Haven House, and of the life she had built on silent strength. She walked to her bedroom, heart lighter, knowing that her sacrifices, once hidden, had paved the way for a new legacy, one of empowerment, compassion, and unspoken love. A week later, a hush fell over Haven House. Claire Whitman lay in the small infirmary bed off the parlor, her breathing shallow and labored. Martha sat beside her, gently clasping Claire's frail hand in both of her own. The garden beyond the window was still bright with late autumn blooms, but inside, time seemed to slow to a fragile whisper. Claire's eyes fluttered open, and she managed a faint smile. "Martha!" she croaked. Martha brushed a strand of silver hair from Claire's forehead. "Shh! Rest, my dear friend." Claire's grip tightened. "No, I have to say it." She paused, gathering her strength. "You saved my life." Martha's throat tightened. "You saved mine, Claire. You reminded me I was never too old to begin again." Claire coughed, and Martha pressed a cool cloth to her friend's brow. Claire's eyes glistened with tears. "Haven House. It's your gift to the world." Martha swallowed hard. "It's our gift." Claire's gaze drifted toward the sunlit parlor. "I'm sorry I won't see it flourish." Martha held Claire's hand tighter, letting the silence speak what words failed to. After a moment, Claire whispered, "Thank you. For everything." Martha brushed a tear from Claire's cheek. "For what?" Claire managed a small, brave laugh. "For giving me purpose, when I thought my days were over." Martha leaned close. "You gave me purpose, too, by showing me what true friendship means." Claire's breathing slowed further. She squeezed Martha's hand. "Promise me," she whispered. "You'll keep going." "I promise." Martha's voice was both soft and fierce. Claire closed her eyes, a peaceful expression settling on her face. Martha remained beside her until the final breath left Claire's body, then pressed the back of her hand to her lips in farewell. Later, in the autumn dusk, Martha stood alone by the oak bench, holding Claire's favorite scarf. The red and gold pattern reminded her of Sunday drives they'd taken decades ago. Now it felt like a keepsake too precious for words. Martha wrapped the scarf around the bench's armrest, knowing Claire's spirit would always linger in Haven House's halls. As the wind stirred the last leaves, she whispered into the quiet courtyard, "You saved my life, Claire, just as I saved my own." A single leaf drifted down, landing on the scarf like a gentle benediction. That spring, the regional middle school held its annual writing competition on the theme of extraordinary elders. Liam Carson decided to share his grandmother's journey. He sat at his cluttered desk, notebook open, sunlight filtering through the classroom window. The title he penned was bold and true. They said she was poor, but she was the richest woman I knew. He began with the dinner, where his mother's harsh words cut deeper than any knife. How Grandma Martha, once invisible, chose silence and dignity over shame. He wrote of her midnight resolve, packing only a few belongings and a lifetime of memories, of the quiet power she reclaimed when she sold her home and seized her independence. Liam described Haven House's ribbon-cutting ceremony under the old oak tree, the way Martha stood tall in pearls and soft gray wool, calling it a door open to those who felt alone. He remembered the day he found her ledger, tallies of kindness and sacrifice adding to $128,000, money she'd quietly given him over decades. He wrote how she created a sanctuary for 3 women who carried their own burdens, and how she protected that refuge forever through her living will. He detailed Claire's final goodbye, the friend who reminded Martha that life's value wasn't measured in dollars or deeds, but in the courage to begin again. And he recounted the day Tom came, hat in hand, to sit beside her on the bench and share silent forgiveness beneath the dappled sunlight. Liam closed his eyes for a moment and reflected on the lesson at the heart of his essay: that true wealth lives not in bank accounts, but in the richness of compassion, resilience, and the choices we make to honor our own worth. When he read his entry aloud before the class, his voice was steady. Grandma Martha showed me that sometimes being rich means giving yourself permission to live, to dream, and to build something lasting for others. Applause rippled through the room, and Liam smiled at the proud faces of his classmates and teachers. His essay didn't just win the competition, it spread through the community like wildfire. People read about the quiet widow who sold her home, who transformed herself and her town, and they listened with open hearts. In the days that followed, local newspapers ran features on Haven House. Neighbors contributed blankets and books. Volunteers offered to help in the garden. Martha's true story, the one of a woman once written off as poor, became a beacon of hope. That evening, Liam returned to Greenwood Haven, clutching his blue ribbon. Martha waited in her reading nook, the single window framing the courtyard's first blossoms. He handed her the ribbon and hugged her tightly. "Grandma," he whispered, "you are the richest woman I know." Martha pressed her cheek against his, tears glistening in her eyes. "And you've given me my greatest legacy," she replied softly. Outside, the oak leaves rustled in the gentle spring breeze, as if affirming the truth that sometimes the richest treasures are forged in silence, and only revealed when we choose to speak.